Hi everybody, welcome to Live Blogger. In this tutorial series, we are creating this box shadow generator using HTML, CSS and JavaScript. And in the previous video, we wrote the CSS of this design and this is how it looks right now. Now in this video, we will start with the functionality. So in this video, we will write the code to generate the box shadow over here when we move these sliders over here. So let's get started. Alright, this is our source code, and if you go back to our index.html file, here we can see we have already linked our main.js file. So let's start with the JavaScript. Now the first thing we need to do is we need to reference some of these elements from the HTML into our JavaScript. So we need to reference the box because we need to add the box shadow to the box. And then we also need to reference this generate code button. And then we have all these controls over here. So we have these input fields with different types, but all of them have this class called control. So we'll reference all of these controls. So let's go to our main.js file and let's type const. And first of all, let's reference the box. So let's type box and we'll set it equal to document.querySelector. And we have a division with a class of box, and it is inside this box shadow generator class. So let's type .box shadow generator box, and then we'll reference the generate code button. So let's type const generate code button equals document.querySelector, and here we'll type box shadow generator generate code button, and then lastly we will select all the controls. So let's type const controls equals document.querySelector box shadow generator, and we have a class of control for all the controls. And here we need to type query selector all because we have multiple elements being selected over here. Right now let's create some variables to store all the values. So we need to create variables for all these values over here. So first of all, let's create a variable for the x value. So here I'll just type let x value equals 0 by default. And in the same way, let's create variables for all the other controls. So let's type let y value equals 0, let blur value equals 0, and we also have opacity. So let's type opacity value, we'll set it to 0, and let's type spread value 0, and then we have color. So let's type let color value, and for the color we'll just set a value of RGBA 0, 0, 0 and 1. And then lastly we need to set the inset value. So let's type inset value equals false by default. Right now let's add event listeners to all these controls. So let's type controls, and we have multiple elements inside these controls, so we will use a for each loop for that. So let's type .for each, and for each of the controls I'll just call it C, and let's create an arrow function over here, and let's type C.add event listener, and we will listen for the input event. And when someone changes the values inside the control, we'll just call a function to update the values, and we'll name the function update values. Alright, now let's create this function. So let's type const update values, and now in this function we'll just update the values of these variables. So we will get the values from the input fields, and we will store them inside these variables over here. So let's type x value equals, and we'll type document.querySelector, and if we go back to our index.html file, here we can see first of all we have this x value input, and for that we have an ID of x value. So let's add that over here. So I'll just type hash x value, and we will do the same for all the other variables. So I'll just duplicate this down over here, and this is y value, and here let's change this to y value, and then we have blur value. These are the variables, and here if you go to the HTML, here we can see blur. So let's type blur over here, and then we have the opacity value. So just type opacity value, and we need to get the value of these elements. So we need to type dot value at the end. So let's add dot value at the end of all these elements. Alright, for the opacity we have an ID of opacity, so let's type opacity over here, and then we have spread value, and for the spread value we have an ID of spread, and then we have color value, and for that we have this ID of color, and then lastly we have inset value, and for that we have an ID of inset. Now the next thing we need to do is we need to change the format of the color value. So if you go back to our design, and if I right click over here and click on inspect, and if I go to console, and here let's select the color, so let's type document.query selector color, and here we can see we have the color, and if I just type dot value, here we can see we have this hexadecimal value. Now we need to convert it to an RGBA value. So let's create a function for that, and we need to split these values into groups of 2, and we need to convert it into regular values. Right now it is hexadecimal values. So let's go back and let's create a function for that. So here I'll just create a function called hex to RGBA, and here we will get the hex value as the argument. Now let's split this into RG and B. So let's type let R equals, we need to type parse int, and here we need to get the first two numbers. So for that you have to type hex dot slice and 1, 3. So this will get the first two numbers from this hex value, and after that we need to type 16 because this is a hexadecimal value, and let's duplicate this 2 more times, and we'll change this to G, and we'll change this to B, and here we'll just type 3 and 5, and here we'll just type 5 and 7. So now here we have the value of red inside R, then we have the value of green inside G, and then we have the value of blue inside B, and we are converting it from hexadecimal into integer. And now let's return this in RGBA format. So let's type return, and we will use backticks because we need to use variables. So here we need to type RGBA, and in parentheses we need to pass these variables. So let's type dollar symbol, and in curly braces let's type R, and then we have a comma, and then let's type G, then we have a comma, and then let's type B, and then we have a comma. And then for the opacity, let's get the value of this variable, opacity value. So let's type dollar symbol opacity value, and let me also adjust these initial values. So if you go back to our HTML file, here we can see for blur radius we have a value of 6. So let's type 6 over here, and if you scroll down, for the opacity we have a value of 0.3. So let's add that over here, and here also I'll just type 0.3. Right now the next thing we will do is we'll call this function hex to RGBA. So here when we are setting the value of color value, here I'll just call the function. So let's type hex to RGBA, and we will get the return value and pass it over here to this variable right here, and we'll pass the value of this element as the argument. And now the last thing we need to do is add the box shadow to this box right here. So we'll create a function called generate box shadow for that. So after updating all these values, we will call a function called generate box shadow, and let's create this function over here. So let's type const generate box shadow, and the first thing we will do is we will check whether we have the inset value set to true or false. So let's type if inset value, and if the inset value is true, then we need to add inset inside our code. Alright, so now let's add the CSS to the box. So let's type box dot style dot box shadow equals, and let's use backticks, and here we'll type inset, and let's type dollar symbol, and the first value we need to have in a box shadow is x value. So let's type x value over here, and then let's add a space, let's type y value, and then we have the blur value, and then we have the spread value, and then lastly we have the color value. So this is the CSS for the box shadow with inset. Now let's add an else over here, and I'll just copy this line of code from here and let's paste it over here, and let's just delete inset from here. So this is the code for the box shadow without the inset. And here after each of these values we also need to add pixel. So let's type pixel, and even for the y value we need to type pixel, and for the blur value we need to type pixel, and spread value we need to type pixel, and for the color we don't need to type pixel. We'll do the same over here. Right, now let's save this and let's go back to our website, and let's check whether it is working. So let's move this slider, and right now we can see that the inset value is being added. So let's go back and let's see what's the problem. And if you scroll down here, we can see we are getting the value of the inset element. Now if you go back to the console, if you right click over here and click on inspect, and if you go to console, and here if I just type document dot query selector hash inset, and if I just type dot value, we can see that we are getting this value of on over here. Now we need to get the checked value from here. We need to type dot checked, and now we can see we are getting true or false. So we need to change value to checked for the inset. So let's go back, and here we need to type dot checked. Right, now let's go back to our website, and now we can see that all the sliders are working all right. And let's increase the blur radius a little bit. Let's increase the spread radius. Let's decrease the opacity, and everything is working all right. Let's change the color, and we can see that even the color is changing. So everything is working all right. Let's also check the inset, and now we can see we have the box shadow set to inset. So that's basically how you generate box shadow using these sliders. Alright, so that's it for this video. In the next video we will write the code to generate the code for the CSS, and we'll display the code over here, and we'll also add syntax highlighting for that. So we'll do all of that in the next video. So if you have any doubts, you can ask in the comments below. And if you like this video, please click on the like button and subscribe to this channel to get the latest video updates. Thanks a lot for watching. Have a nice day.